They say grief comes in waves. Some days the water is calm. You can almost breathe, almost pretend that life will be normal again. Other days, the waves crash so hard you think you'll drown. But nothing prepares you for the wave that comes when you see your dead husband standing in the frozen foods aisle, very much alive, reaching for a bag of peas. My name is Margaret, and I'm 52 years old. I was married to Edward for 27 years. 27 years of building a life together in our Victorian terrace in Nottingham. 27 years of raising our 2 daughters, of Sunday roasts and summer holidays, of growing old together exactly as we'd planned. Edward was a good man. Or so I believed. He worked as a logistics manager for a shipping company, steady, reliable work that kept him busy but never wealthy. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We had enough for the mortgage, for the girls' education, for the occasional trip to Spain. We had enough for a good life. And then, 6 months ago, Edward died. It happened on a Tuesday in March. Edward had been on a work trip to Aberdeen, routine, he'd said. Just a few days checking on the Northern Distribution Centre. He'd called me the night before, complaining about the cold Scottish weather, promising to bring me back some shortbread. The next morning, police officers arrived at my door. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm afraid there's been an accident." Edward's car had gone off the road in the Highlands. Icy conditions, steep cliff, the vehicle had plunged into a lock. They never recovered his body. The funeral was held 3 weeks later. Without a body, we buried an empty coffin. The girls, Rebecca, 24, and Charlotte, 21, stood beside me in black dresses, clutching tissues, trying to make sense of a loss that felt unreal. Because it was unreal. Literally. But I didn't know that yet. The months after Edward's death were a fog. I went through the motions, accepting condolences, answering sympathy cards, trying to keep the house running. The life insurance company was slow but eventually paid out, £150,000. Edward had always been sensible about these things. I used some of it to pay off the mortgage, put the rest in savings for the girls, tried to imagine a future without the man I'd loved for nearly 3 decades. It wasn't easy, but I was surviving. And then came the grocery store. It was a Saturday afternoon in September. 6 months and 3 days since Edward's accident, I was at Tesco doing the weekly shop, moving through the aisles on autopilot. Bread, milk, eggs, the mundane rhythm of survival. I turned into the frozen foods section. And there he was. My first thought was, I'm hallucinating. Grief does that sometimes. You see the person you've lost everywhere, in crowds, in passing cars, in the face of strangers who bear only the slightest resemblance. But this wasn't a resemblance. This was Edward. My Edward. Same height, same posture, same slightly graying hair that he always combed to the right, same way of tilting his head when examining products, as if frozen peas required serious consideration. He was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, a blue jacket, dark jeans, trainers instead of his usual brogues. But the face, the hands, the way he moved. That was my husband. I stood frozen in the aisle, a packet of pasta clutched in my hand, unable to move or breathe or think. This wasn't possible. Edward was dead. I'd planned his funeral. I'd scattered symbolic ashes at his favorite spot in the Peak District. I'd cried myself to sleep for months. And yet here he was, very much alive, adding a bag of frozen chips to his basket. He didn't see me. Thank God, he didn't see me. He finished his selection, turned, and walked toward the other end of the store. And something inside me, something beyond grief, beyond shock, beyond reason, made a decision. I was going to follow him. I abandoned my trolley in the aisle and walked after him, keeping my distance, using other shoppers as cover. He moved through the store with the ease of someone who knew exactly what he needed. Milk, bread, a bottle of wine, some cheese from the deli counter. Normal shopping. Normal life. As if he hadn't left a wife and 2 daughters drowning in grief. He paid at the self-checkout. I watched from behind a display of crisps, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone must be able to hear it. He collected his bags and walked toward the exit. I followed. The car park was busy Saturday afternoon chaos. I watched him load his shopping into a car I didn't recognize, a silver Honda, nothing special, the kind of car that blends into traffic without anyone noticing. He got in and started the engine. I ran to my own car, hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I couldn't lose him. Whatever was happening, whatever impossible, inexplicable thing was unfolding, I needed to know the truth. I followed him for 20 minutes. Through the city center, onto the Ring Road, into a part of Nottingham I rarely visited, a quiet residential area near the university, full of semi-detached houses with tidy gardens. He pulled into the driveway of a house on Maple Avenue. Number 47. A pleasant-looking house with a red door and hanging baskets full of autumn flowers. Someone had made it look welcoming. Someone was expecting him home. I parked across the street, engine idling, watching. Edward got out of the car with his shopping bags. He walked up the path. The red door opened before he reached it. And a woman stepped out. She was younger than me, early 40s perhaps, blonde, pretty. She was smiling, reaching for one of his bags, saying something I couldn't hear. He leaned in and kissed her. Not a peck on the cheek. A real kiss. The kiss of a husband greeting his wife. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, and watched my dead husband disappear into another woman's house. And I understood with sickening clarity that everything I'd believed for the past 6 months, everything I'd grieved, everything I'd mourned was a lie. Edward wasn't dead. He'd just decided to stop being married to me. I don't know how long I sat there. The engine ran until the fuel warning light flickered on. The sun moved across the sky, shadows lengthening on Maple Avenue. People walked dogs. Children cycled past. Normal life continued all around me while my world collapsed into rubble. My husband was alive. My husband had another woman. My husband had chosen to let me believe he was dead rather than simply ask for a divorce. What kind of monster does that? Eventually, numbness gave way to something sharper. Not grief. I'd already spent 6 months grieving. This was different. This was rage. Pure, cold, calculated rage. I turned off the engine and pulled out my phone. I photographed the house, the car, the number plate. I noted the address in my phone, 47 Maple Avenue. Evidence. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but whatever it was, I would need proof. I drove home in a trance. The house that had felt so empty for 6 months now felt like a crime scene. Every photograph of Edward on the walls, every memento of our marriage. The sympathy card still stacked in a drawer. The death certificate I'd framed because someone told me I might need it for legal purposes. A death certificate for a man who wasn't dead. I picked it up and stared at it. Edward James Thompson, deceased, March 17th. Lies, all of it lies. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, searching for answers. First, I searched the address, 47 Maple Avenue, Nottingham. Property records showed it had been purchased 18 months ago, 8 months before Edward's death, by a woman named Diane Fletcher. Diane Fletcher. I searched her name. Facebook showed me a smiling blonde woman in her early 40s, a teaching assistant at a local primary school, posts about gardening, cooking, weekends away. And photographs. Photographs of her and a man she referred to only as my love or him, never by name. The man's face was always turned away or cropped out or hidden behind sunglasses. But I knew those hands. I knew that posture. I knew my husband. The timeline began to crystallize. 18 months ago, Diane had bought the house on Maple Avenue. Around the same time, Edward had started taking more work trips, overnight stays in various cities, conferences he couldn't miss, client meetings that required his personal attention. I'd never questioned it. Why would I? He was my husband, I trusted him. And while I was trusting him, he was building a completely separate life. But the faked death, that was the part I couldn't understand. An affair was one thing. Cruel, yes, devastating, absolutely. But human, understandable in some twisted way. But to fake your own death. To let your wife and daughters believe you drowned in a Scottish loch. To put us through a funeral, through months of grief, through the bureaucratic nightmare of death certificates and life insurance claims. That wasn't just betrayal. That was sociopathy. The life insurance. The thought struck me like a physical blow. £150,000, paid out 3 months after Edward's death. I'd used it to pay off the mortgage, to secure the girls' futures, to rebuild a life I thought had been shattered by tragedy. But if Edward wasn't dead, I'd claimed life insurance for a living person. That was fraud. And who would the insurance company blame when they discovered the truth? Not Edward, he was dead. They'd blame me. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. I needed help, professional help, legal help. But it was 3 a.m. No solicitors were answering calls. No private investigators were available for consultation. I was alone with the most devastating discovery of my life. And I had no idea what to do next. Morning came slowly. I showered, dressed, made coffee I didn't drink, tried to eat toast that tasted like cardboard. At 9 o'clock exactly, I called a solicitor. Not just any solicitor, Helena Price, a partner at a firm in the city center that specialized in fraud and family law. I'd seen her interviewed on local news once, discussing a complicated inheritance case. She'd seemed sharp, competent. I needed sharp and competent. Mrs. Thompson, thank you for coming in so quickly. Helena's office was on the 4th floor of a Georgian building near the castle. Tasteful, professional, the kind of place where serious problems were solved. I didn't know where else to turn. You mentioned on the phone that this was urgent, something about your husband. I took a deep breath. My husband died 6 months ago, or at least I thought he did. Yesterday, I saw him alive at Tesco. I followed him to a house where he's living with another woman. Helena's expression didn't change. Perhaps she'd heard stranger stories. Perhaps nothing surprised her anymore. Tell me everything, she said, from the beginning. I talked for an hour. The marriage, the work trips, the accident in Scotland, the funeral, the insurance payout, the grocery store, the house on Maple Avenue, Diane Fletcher. Helena took notes throughout, her pen scratching steadily across legal paper. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. Mrs. Thompson, what you're describing is extraordinarily serious. If your husband faked his death, he's committed multiple criminal offenses. Fraud, filing false reports, potentially conspiracy, depending on who else was involved. What about me? The life insurance, I claimed it in good faith. I didn't know. You're a victim, not a perpetrator. As long as you report this discovery promptly, you should be protected. She paused. But we need evidence. Solid, irrefutable evidence that the man you saw is actually Edward Thompson and that he deliberately staged his death. How do I get that? We hire a private investigator, someone who can document his current life, his activities, his identity. Once we have that, we go to the police. I nodded slowly. And Diane, the other woman. Helena's expression hardened slightly. That depends on what she knew. If she was complicit in faking his death, she's an accessory. If she was deceived like you were, then she's another victim. Exactly. I left Helena's office with a plan forming in my mind. A private investigator would take time, cost money, produce results that might take weeks to compile. But I already knew where Edward was living. I already knew what he looked like now. And I wasn't sure I could wait weeks to confront the man who had destroyed my life. The private investigator's name was Malcolm Green. A former police detective, now running his own agency from a small office in West Bridgeford. Helena had recommended him, discreet, thorough, experienced in exactly these kinds of cases. Cases like mine, I'd asked. Fraud, faked deaths, husbands who aren't what they seem. Malcolm had shrugged, pouring me a cup of weak tea. You'd be surprised how common it is. Most just run off with a mistress. Yours went the extra mile. The extra mile. That was one way to describe destroying your family's entire understanding of reality. Malcolm spent the next 2 weeks documenting Edward's new life. Every few days, he'd send me reports, photographs, observations, each one another knife in a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Edward, now apparently going by Edward Fletcher, having taken Diane's surname, worked from home as a freelance consultant. He left the house at irregular hours, sometimes meeting clients at coffee shops, sometimes not leaving at all. He and Diane shopped together at the same Tesco where I'd spotted him. They walked their dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit, in the local park every evening. They had dinner parties with neighbors who seemed to genuinely like them. They looked happy. That was the worst part. While I'd been drowning in grief, crying into his pillow, telling our daughters that Daddy was never coming home, he'd been walking a dog and hosting dinner parties. Malcolm's most devastating discovery came in week 2. There's something else you should know, he said during one of our phone calls. His voice was careful, cautious. What is it? Diane Fletcher, she's pregnant. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. Pregnant. About 5 months along, from what I can observe. She's been to prenatal appointments twice this week. Edward accompanied her both times. A baby. My husband, the man I'd buried, mourned, grieved, was having a baby with another woman. While I'd been planning his funeral, she'd been planning a nursery. I drove to Maple Avenue that night. I don't know what I intended to do. Confront him, scream at him, demand answers that would never satisfy. I just needed to see it for myself. The house was lit warmly from within. Through the front window, I could see them in the living room. Diane on the sofa, hand resting on her visible bump. Edward beside her, watching television, looking completely at peace. No guilt. No shame. No awareness that the woman he'd abandoned was sitting outside in the darkness, watching him live the life he'd stolen. I sat there for 2 hours. Watching, thinking, planning. Edward had been clever. He'd chosen to die in Scotland, far from home, in circumstances that made body recovery impossible. He'd left no loose ends, no suspicious behavior before the trip, no hints that anything was wrong. He'd planned this meticulously, which meant he'd been planning it while sleeping beside me, while eating dinners I cooked, while kissing me goodbye and saying, "I love you." Every moment of our final months together had been a performance. And I'd believed every word. The next morning, I called Helena. I want to confront him. That's not advisable. Not yet, we need. I know what we need. Evidence, documentation, a solid legal case. Malcolm's given us all of that. But Helena, I need to look him in the eye. I need to hear him explain how he could do this. She was quiet for a moment. If you confront him, he might run. He's done it before. Then we do it somewhere he can't run. Somewhere public. Somewhere with witnesses. What are you thinking? I smiled grimly. Malcolm says they're hosting a dinner party next Saturday. They're neighbors, friends, people who think Edward Fletcher is a wonderful man. You want to expose him at his own party. I want everyone to see who he really is. I want Diane to know the truth. And I want Edward to understand that he can't just erase 27 years of marriage by pretending to drown in a lock. Helena was silent for a long moment. It's risky, if it goes wrong. My husband faked his death, stole £150,000 from his own family, and is having a baby with another woman while his daughters still cry themselves to sleep. I think we're past the point of worrying about risk. The plan came together over the following week. Malcolm would position himself outside the house, ready to intervene if things turned violent. Helena would be on standby, prepared to contact police the moment I gave the signal. And I would walk into that dinner party and destroy the fantasy Edward had built. Rebecca and Charlotte knew by now. I'd told them 2 days after my conversation with Helena. We'd sat in the living room, the same living room where we'd gathered after the funeral, holding each other, trying to understand a loss that made no sense. Now the loss made too much sense. He's alive. Rebecca's face had cycled through disbelief, confusion, and finally rage. He's been alive this whole time. Yes. And he just left. He chose to make us think he was dead rather than face us. Yes. Charlotte hadn't spoken at all. She'd simply stood up, walked to the mantelpiece where Edward's photograph still sat, and thrown it against the wall. The glass shattered. None of us moved to clean it up. I want to come with you, Rebecca said the night before the confrontation. To the dinner party. I want him to see what he did to us. It might be dangerous. I don't care. He's my father. He owes me an explanation. He owes all of us that much. I looked at my eldest daughter, this strong, fierce woman who had inherited her father's determination, but none of his cruelty. All right, we'll face him together. Saturday arrived with cruel sunshine. The kind of bright, clear autumn day that should accompany good news and happy memories. Instead, it would be the day I destroyed my husband's carefully constructed lie. I dressed carefully. Not for mourning, I'd done enough of that. I wore a red dress. Bold, visible, impossible to ignore. Rebecca wore black. For the death of who we thought he was, she explained. At 7 o'clock, we drove to Maple Avenue. The house glowed with warmth and welcome. Cars lined the street, the dinner guests, arriving for an evening with their charming neighbors. I parked across the road, took a deep breath, and walked toward the front door. The red door loomed before me like a portal to another dimension. On one side, the life Edward had abandoned. His wife, his daughters, his 27-year marriage. On the other side, the life he'd stolen for himself. A new woman, a new identity, a baby on the way. I raised my hand and knocked. Footsteps inside, laughter, the muffled sounds of a party in full swing. The door opened, and there she was. Diane Fletcher. Up close, she was even prettier than her photographs. Blonde hair swept back in an elegant twist, a flowing green dress that accommodated her pregnant belly, a warm, welcoming smile that faltered slightly when she saw 2 strangers on her doorstep. "Can I help you?" Her voice was soft, kind even, not the voice of a villain. But then, neither had been Edward's. "I'm looking for Edward," I said, keeping my tone pleasant, controlled. "Edward Thompson." The confusion on her face was genuine. "I'm sorry, there's no one here by that name. My partner is Edward Fletcher." "Your partner," I interrupted gently, "is my husband, and his name is Edward James Thompson. We've been married for 27 years. He faked his death 6 months ago, and I'd very much like to speak with him." The color drained from Diane's face. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, protecting the child she carried. Behind her, the sounds of the party continued, oblivious guests enjoying wine and conversation, unaware of the bomb about to detonate in their midst. That's not possible. Edward's first wife died years ago in a car accident. He showed me the death certificate. I laughed bitterly. "Let me guess. Very official looking, very convincing. Just like the one he arranged for himself when he decided to disappear." Diane's mouth opened, closed. She looked like a woman watching her world crumble in real time. I knew that feeling. I'd lived it for 6 months. Who is it, love? And there he was. Edward. Walking down the hallway toward the front door, wine glass in hand, that familiar smile on his face. The smile froze when he saw me. Time stopped. For a long, crystalline moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Edward stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not in 27 years of marriage, not through arguments or grief or joy. This was pure, primal terror. The terror of a man watching his lies collapse. "Margaret," his voice was barely a whisper. "How did you find you?" I stepped into the doorway, Rebecca close behind me. "I saw you at Tesco, Edward, buying frozen peas, like any normal person who isn't supposed to be dead." Behind Edward, the dinner party guests had noticed something was wrong. Conversations died. Faces turned toward the commotion at the door. "Good." I wanted witnesses. "This is insane," Edward said, but his voice shook. "Diane, this woman is clearly disturbed. I don't know what she's talking about." "Don't." The word came from Rebecca, sharp as a blade. She stepped forward, her face twisted with rage and grief, and something that looked like hatred. "Don't you dare lie to us again, Dad. Don't you dare stand there and pretend you don't know who we are." Edward's mask cracked. Just for a moment, just a flicker, I saw the real man beneath. The coward who'd chosen to let his daughters believe he was dead rather than face the mess he'd made of his life. "Becca," he whispered, "I can explain." "Explain what?" I stepped fully into the house now, past Diane, who stood frozen in shock. "Explain how you faked your death. Explain how you let us plan a funeral for an empty coffin. Explain how you collected life insurance money while we scattered fake ashes in the Peak District." The dinner guests were fully alert now. A man in a blue jumper stood up from the dining table. A woman put down her wine glass, her face pale with confusion. "Edward," the man in the blue jumper said slowly, "what's going on? Who are these people?" "They're his family," I said, turning to address the room. "His real family. I'm Margaret Thompson, his wife of 27 years. This is Rebecca, our daughter. Edward has another daughter too, Charlotte, who was too devastated to be here tonight." I turned back to Edward. "But I'm sure he's told you all about his previous life. About the wife and daughters he left behind when he died so tragically in that car accident in Scotland." Silence. Complete, devastating silence. Diane was crying now. Silent tears streaming down her face, one hand still pressed to her belly. "You told me she was dead," she whispered. "You told me your first wife died in a car accident. You showed me photos, you said." "Diane, please, let me explain." "What is there to explain?" I asked. "You lied to everyone. To me, for years, to Diane from the very beginning. You created a fantasy life and you didn't care who you destroyed in the process." I pulled out my phone and showed Diane the screen. "This is our wedding photo, 27 years ago. This is Edward at Rebecca's graduation. This is him at Christmas last year, 2 months before he died." Diane looked at the photos, then at Edward, then back at me. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Oh my God." The dinner guests were leaving. One by one, they gathered their coats and slipped out the front door, desperate to escape the catastrophe unfolding before them. No one said goodbye. No one made eye contact. They just left. Soon, only 5 of us remained. Me, Rebecca, Edward, Diane, and the baby she carried, an innocent child who would be born into chaos. "Everyone out," Edward said suddenly, his voice hardening. "This is my house. You have no right to be here." "Your house," I laughed. "Bought with money you hid from our marriage, furnished with cash you siphoned away while I was managing our household budget. This house is built on fraud, Edward, just like everything else in your pathetic new life. I want you to leave." And I wanted a husband who didn't fake his own death. We don't always get what we want. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Why, Dad? That's all I want to know. Why couldn't you just ask for a divorce like a normal person? Why did you have to make us believe you were dead?" Edward was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold. "Because a divorce would have cost me everything. The house, half my pension, years of legal battles. This way was cleaner." Cleaner. He'd destroyed his family because it was cleaner, cleaner. The word echoed in the silence like a gunshot. I stared at the man I'd loved for 27 years, the man I'd shared a bed with, raised children with, planned a future with, and I realized I'd never known him at all. "Cleaner," I repeated slowly. You let your daughters believe their father was dead because it was cleaner than a divorce. You don't understand. Then explain it to me, Edward. Explain how abandoning your family was easier than having an honest conversation. Explain how faking your death was preferable to admitting you'd fallen in love with someone else. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. Our marriage was dead, Margaret. It had been dead for years. We were just going through the motions. I was suffocating. So you killed yourself, metaphorically. I freed myself. And what about us? Rebecca's voice cracked. What about Mum? What about Charlotte? What about the 6 months we spent crying ourselves to sleep, unable to function, barely surviving? Edward flinched. For just a moment, something human flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone. You would have moved on eventually. People do. Diane hadn't spoken in several minutes. She sat on the bottom step of the staircase, hands wrapped around her belly, tears streaming silently down her face. Her perfect dinner party, her perfect life, had collapsed around her. Now she looked up, her voice barely a whisper. Did you ever love me, or was I just part of your escape plan? Edward turned to her, his expression softening. Of course I love you. Everything I told you about us was true. You're my future, you and the baby. But everything else was a lie. Your wife, your name, your entire past. I had to protect us. If I'd divorced Margaret properly, she would have taken everything. We wouldn't have this house. We wouldn't have the savings. We wouldn't have the life we've built. I laughed bitterly. The savings? You mean the life insurance money I claimed after your death? The £150,000 that was supposed to help me and the girls survive without you. Diane's head snapped toward Edward. Life insurance. She claimed life insurance. That's fraud, she continued, her voice rising. That's criminal fraud, and if she claimed it and you're not actually dead. She's implicated too, Edward said quickly. That's why she won't go to the police. She can't expose me without exposing herself. I smiled coldly. That's where you're wrong, Edward. I've already spoken to a solicitor. I reported your death in good faith because I genuinely believed you were dead. I'm a victim, not a conspirator. Edward's face went pale. You spoke to a solicitor. And a private investigator. And the police are expecting my call the moment I leave this house. So whatever fantasy you had about me staying quiet to protect myself, you can forget it. The shift in Edward's demeanor was immediate. The cold confidence evaporated, replaced by something desperate, panicked. Margaret, wait, let's talk about this. We can work something out. The insurance money, I'll pay it back. I have savings. We can make this go away quietly. Make it go away? I shook my head. You can't make this go away, Edward. You faked your death. You committed fraud. You've been living under a false identity for months. These aren't problems you can throw money at. Please, think about the girls. Think about what this will do to them if it becomes public. Don't you dare use our daughters as a shield. My voice was ice. You didn't think about them when you decided to disappear. You didn't think about them crying at your funeral. You didn't think about Charlotte dropping out of university because she couldn't cope with losing her father. Edward's face contorted. Charlotte dropped out. 3 months ago, she's been in therapy ever since. Depression, anxiety, struggling to understand why her father was taken from her so suddenly. For the first time, I saw something that might have been genuine pain cross his features. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. You were too busy walking your dog and hosting dinner parties to check on the family you abandoned. Diane stood up slowly. Her face had hardened, the tears drying on her cheeks. I need you to leave, she said to Edward. He turned to her, confused. What? I need you to leave this house, right now. Diane, this is our home. This is MY home. My name is on the deed. My money paid the deposit, and I will not share it with a man who lies as easily as he breathes. You don't mean that. Think about the baby. I am thinking about the baby. Her voice rose, fierce and protective. I'm thinking about raising a child with a man who apparently has no problem abandoning his children when they become inconvenient. She pointed toward the door. Get out now. Edward looked between us. His wife, his daughter, his pregnant girlfriend, all united against him. 3 women he'd betrayed. 3 women who had believed his lies. 3 women who were now seeing him clearly for the first time. This isn't over, he said, his voice low. You can't just... Yes, we can. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the police now. I suggest you stay here and wait for them to arrive. Running didn't work last time. It won't work now. I dialed the number Helena had given me, the direct line to a detective who was already familiar with the case. Detective Morrison, it's Margaret Thompson. I found him, 47 Maple Avenue. He's here now. I hung up. They'll be here in 15 minutes. I suggest you use that time to think about what you're going to say. Edward's shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of him, replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. He sank onto the sofa, head in his hands, the picture of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse. I felt nothing. No sympathy, no satisfaction, just empty exhaustion. Rebecca, I said quietly, let's wait outside. She nodded, wiping her eyes. We walked toward the door, leaving Edward alone with Diane, 2 people who now had to navigate the ruins of a relationship built entirely on deception. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. I breathed deeply, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Clarity. The nightmare wasn't over. There would be legal proceedings, media attention, difficult conversations with Charlotte, the long, painful process of untangling a marriage that had ended in the most brutal way imaginable. But for the first time since I'd stood at Edward's empty grave, I knew the truth. And the truth, painful as it was better than the lie. The police arrived in 12 minutes. 2 patrol cars, lights flashing, pulling up to the house on Maple Avenue that had seemed so welcoming just an hour ago. Neighbors peered through curtains. Dog walkers paused on the pavement. The quiet residential street had become a crime scene. Detective Morrison was a tall woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She'd been briefed by Helena, prepared for what we'd found. But even she seemed slightly stunned when Edward walked out of the house in handcuffs. Edward James Thompson, she said formally, I'm arresting you on suspicion of fraud, filing false reports, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Edward said nothing. He didn't look at me as they led him to the car, didn't look at Rebecca, didn't offer any final words of explanation or apology. He just disappeared into the back of the police car. Again. Diane stood in the doorway of her home, arms wrapped around herself, watching. She looked broken, hollowed out. The woman who'd answered the door 2 hours ago, confident, glowing, excited about her dinner party, had been replaced by someone who didn't recognize her own life anymore. I knew that feeling intimately. Against every instinct, I walked toward her. Diane. She flinched, as if expecting an attack. I know you probably hate me, I said quietly, and I understand, but I want you to know I don't hate you. She looked up, confused. Why not? I was sleeping with your husband. I'm pregnant with his child. You didn't know. He lied to you just like he lied to me. We're both victims of the same man. Tears welled in her eyes again. He told me his first wife had died. He cried when he talked about her. About you. She laughed bitterly. He said losing you was the worst thing that ever happened to him. He's a good actor. I lived with him for 27 years and never suspected a thing. Diane's hand moved to her belly. What am I supposed to do now? I'm having his baby, a baby whose father is going to prison. You raise that child with love and honesty. You make sure they know they're not defined by their father's choices. And if you ever need anything, support, resources, someone who understands, you can contact me. I handed her a card with my phone number. She stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. Why would you help me? Because that baby is innocent. And because I've spent 6 months learning that women are stronger when we support each other instead of tearing each other apart. Rebecca was waiting by the car. She looked exhausted, emotionally drained in a way that aged her 10 years in a single evening. That was kind, she said, what you said to Diane. She didn't deserve this any more than we did. But her baby, that's Dad's child, our half-sibling. I hadn't fully processed that yet. Another child, another innocent life tangled up in Edward's web of lies. I know, we'll have to figure out what that means, if we want any kind of relationship with them. Do we? I looked at my daughter, this strong, wounded woman who had lost her father twice in 6 months. I don't know yet, but we have time to decide. The drive home was silent. Rebecca stared out the window, lost in her own thoughts. I focused on the road, trying to process everything that had happened. Edward was in custody. The truth was finally out. The nightmare that had begun at a grocery store was moving toward some kind of conclusion. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like exhaustion. Charlotte was waiting at the house. She'd refused to come to the confrontation, too fragile, too uncertain, but she'd been texting Rebecca constantly, desperate for updates. When we walked through the door, she ran to us and collapsed into my arms. Is it true? Is he really alive? Yes, sweetheart, he's alive, and he's been arrested. She sobbed against my shoulder, great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. I grieved for him. I cried every single day. I thought I'd never see him again, and he was just living somewhere else, with another woman. I know. How could he do this? Didn't he love us at all? I held my daughter tight, wishing I had answers that would make sense. But there were no answers. Just the cold, hard reality that the man we'd loved had never really existed. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and media attention. Edward's arrest made local news, then national news. A man who'd faked his own death to escape his marriage. It was the kind of story that captured public imagination. Journalists camped outside our house. Camera crews followed us to the shops. Social media exploded with opinions from people who'd never met us. Some called me a hero for exposing him. Others accused me of vindictiveness, of destroying a man who'd simply wanted to start fresh. I ignored all of it. I had more important things to focus on. Helena kept me informed of the legal proceedings. Edward was charged with multiple offenses: fraud, conspiracy, making false statements to police. The insurance company was pursuing civil action to recover the £150,000, though Helena assured me I wouldn't be held liable. You reported the discovery immediately. You cooperated fully with authorities. The insurance company's fight is with Edward, not you. What's going to happen to him? Based on precedent cases, he's looking at 3 to 5 years in prison, more if additional charges emerge. And Diane. She's been questioned but not charged. The police believe she was genuinely deceived. She's as much a victim as you are. 3 to 5 years. For destroying 2 families and a 27-year marriage. It didn't seem like enough. But then, no punishment would ever be enough. The trial took place 8 months later. 8 months of waiting, 8 months of therapy, 8 months of slowly rebuilding a life that had been demolished by a single sighting in a grocery store. The Crown Court in Nottingham was an imposing Victorian building, all columns and stone and the heavy weight of justice. I sat in the gallery with Rebecca and Charlotte on either side of me, watching the man I'd once loved stand in the dock. Edward looked different. Thinner, grayer. The confident, charming man who'd hosted dinner parties had been replaced by someone diminished. Prison had aged him, or perhaps it was simply that the mask had finally fallen away. The prosecution laid out the case methodically. The faked accident, the staged car going off the road in the Scottish Highlands, the empty coffin buried in a Nottingham cemetery. The £150,000 in life insurance money fraudulently claimed. And underneath it all, the cold calculation of a man who decided that disappearing was easier than divorce. The defendant didn't act impulsively, the prosecutor stated. He planned this deception for over a year. He established a new identity. He built a new relationship. He prepared every detail with meticulous care while continuing to live with his wife and daughters as if nothing was wrong. I listened to dates and facts and evidence, each one another confirmation of the lies I'd lived with for 27 years. Edward had opened the account in his new name 14 months before his death. He'd met Diane 18 months before. He'd been siphoning money from our joint finances for nearly 2 years. Every dinner we'd shared, every kiss goodnight, every I love you. All of it a performance while he prepared his escape. Edward's defense was predictable. His barrister painted him as a desperate man trapped in a loveless marriage, seeking happiness, but going about it the wrong way. My client made terrible choices, the barrister acknowledged. He does not deny that, but he is not a monster. He is a man who felt trapped, who saw no way out, who made decisions he now deeply regrets. I wanted to scream. No way out? He could have asked for a divorce. He could have been honest. He could have treated 27 years of marriage with the basic dignity of a conversation. Instead, he'd chosen to make us believe he was dead. That wasn't desperation. That was cruelty. The most devastating testimony came from Charlotte. My youngest daughter, still fragile from months of therapy, took the witness stand to describe the impact of her father's death. I couldn't function, she said, her voice trembling but clear. I dropped out of university. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I had nightmares about his car going off that cliff, about him drowning in cold water calling for help. She looked directly at Edward. I spent 6 months grieving for you, 6 months believing I'd never see you again. And the whole time, you were walking a dog and planning nursery furniture for your new baby. Her voice cracked. How could you do that to us? How could you watch Mum fall apart, watch Rebecca try to hold the family together, watch me lose my mind with grief, and not care? Edward bowed his head. He didn't answer. There was no answer that would suffice. Rebecca didn't testify. She'd decided she couldn't face him directly, couldn't stand in a courtroom and speak to the man who'd abandoned her. But she'd written a victim impact statement that was read aloud. My father didn't just fake his death. He killed a version of himself, the version we loved, the version we trusted, the version we believed was real. Now I don't know which memories are genuine and which were just part of his act. He's taken more than 6 months of grief from me. He's taken 24 years of believing I had a father who loved me. I held her hand as the words were read. She didn't cry. I think she'd run out of tears. I gave my own testimony. Calm, controlled, factual. I described the marriage, the supposed work trips, the accident, the funeral, the grief. And then I described the grocery store. I was buying pasta, I said, just doing my weekly shop, and I looked up and saw my dead husband reaching for frozen peas. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. Grief does that sometimes. You see the person everywhere. But this wasn't a hallucination. This was Edward, very much alive. I looked at him directly. He didn't see me. He finished his shopping and drove home to the house he shared with his pregnant girlfriend. The house I didn't know existed. The life I'd never been told about. The prosecutor asked how I'd felt in that moment. Like the ground had disappeared beneath me. Like everything I'd believed for 27 years was a lie. Like I'd been mourning a ghost while the real person was living 3 miles away, perfectly happy without us. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty. On all counts. Edward closed his eyes as the word was spoken, as if he'd been hopping until the very last moment that somehow he'd escape. But there was no escape this time. The sentencing happened 2 weeks later. The judge was thorough, methodical, unflinching. Mr. Thompson, You have committed one of the most calculated and cruel deceptions I have encountered in my years on the bench. You didn't simply abandon your family. You made them believe you were dead. You allowed them to grieve, to struggle, to suffer, while you built a new life free from responsibility. He paused. The impact on your wife and daughters has been devastating. The betrayal of trust is absolute, and you have shown, throughout these proceedings, very little genuine remorse. Edward stood motionless. I therefore sentence you to 4 years and 6 months in prison. 4.5 years. For destroying everything we'd built together. It wasn't enough. But watching him being led away in handcuffs, watching the courtroom doors close behind him, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Closure. Not happiness, not satisfaction. Just the quiet knowledge that it was finally over. The months after the trial were strange. For so long, my life had been consumed by the discovery, the investigation, the legal proceedings. Every waking moment had been focused on Edward, his lies, his crimes, his punishment. Now, suddenly, there was silence. And in that silence, I had to figure out who I was. Not Edward's wife. Not Edward's widow. Not Edward's victim. Just Margaret. A woman in her 50s, starting over from scratch. Therapy helped. Dr. Amelia Foster, a gentle woman with a calm voice and an office full of plants, guided me through the tangled mess of emotions I'd been carrying. You're not just processing a betrayal, she explained during one of our sessions. You're processing a death that wasn't real and a marriage that wasn't what you thought. That's a unique kind of trauma. I feel stupid. How did I not see it? Because he was skilled at hiding, and because you loved him. Love makes us trust, and trust makes us vulnerable. I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again. That's understandable, but trust isn't all or nothing. You can learn to trust carefully with open eyes. It takes time. Time. Everyone kept telling me it would take time. I was beginning to believe them. Rebecca returned to her life in London. She'd taken a leave of absence from her job during the trial, but now she was back, working, dadding, building a future that didn't revolve around her father's destruction. I'm seeing someone, she told me during one of our weekly phone calls. His name is James. He's a doctor, very kind. Does he know about everything? I told him on our 3rd date. Figured if he could handle that, he could handle anything. And he stayed. He stayed, said it explained why I have trust issues, but he was willing to work through them with me. I smiled, genuinely happy for the first time in months. That sounds wonderful, darling. It is, it really is. Charlotte's recovery was slower. The grief she'd experienced mourning a father who wasn't dead had left deep scars. She was still in therapy, still struggling with depression and anxiety. But she'd re-enrolled in university, part-time, at her own pace, with accommodations for her mental health. I'm going to finish my degree, she told me one evening, her voice carrying a determination I hadn't heard in years. Not for Dad, not to prove anything to him, for me. I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of me too, for the first time in a long time. She paused. Do you think he ever thinks about us, in prison? I don't know, sweetheart, and honestly, I've decided it doesn't matter what he thinks. His thoughts don't affect us anymore, only our own choices do. She nodded slowly. You're right, we get to choose who we become now. He doesn't get a vote. The house in Nottingham sold quickly. Too many memories, too many ghosts, too many rooms where I could still hear Edward's voice, still smell his cologne, still feel his presence like a haunting. I used the money to buy a small cottage in the Peak District, near the spot where I'd scattered his fake ashes, now a place I could reclaim with new meaning. The cottage was old but beautiful. Stone walls, exposed beams, a garden that needed work and a view that took my breath away every morning. I planted flowers. I learned to cook new recipes. I took long walks on the hills, breathing fresh air, feeling my body grow stronger with each passing week. I was healing. Slowly, imperfectly, but healing. Diane reached out 6 months after the trial. Her message was tentative, uncertain. Margaret, I hope this isn't inappropriate. I've been thinking about you a lot. I had the baby, a boy. His name is Thomas. I'm raising him alone, obviously. And I just wanted to say, I'm so sorry for everything. I know I didn't know, but I still feel responsible somehow. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I stared at the message for a long time. Thomas. Edward's son. My daughter's half-brother. Another innocent life, tangled up in the wreckage. I wrote back. Diane, you have nothing to apologize for. You were deceived just like I was. I don't blame you, I never did. Congratulations on Thomas. I hope he brings you joy. And if you ever need anything, support, a friend, someone who understands, please don't hesitate to reach out. Her response came immediately. Thank you, that means more than you know. We met for coffee a month later. It was awkward at first, 2 women bound by the same man, the same lies, the same shattered trust. But beneath the awkwardness was something unexpected. Understanding. He was so convincing, Diane said, cradling her cup. Even now, even knowing everything, part of me still can't believe it. He seemed so genuine. I know, 27 years of marriage, and I never suspected anything. He was a master at hiding who he really was. Do you think he loved either of us, at all? I considered the question. I think he loved himself, and I think he was very good at making us feel loved when it served his purposes. But genuine love, the kind that requires sacrifice and honesty and putting someone else first? No, I don't think he was capable of that. Diane nodded slowly. Thomas will never know him. Not really. Edward will be in prison for most of his childhood. By the time he gets out, Thomas will be 5 or 6. Is that a bad thing? She looked at me, surprised. I don't know. I used to think every child needed a father, but now, maybe some fathers are better off absent. Maybe, but Thomas will have you. And if you raise him with love and honesty, he'll be okay. Better than okay. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. Thank you, Margaret, for not hatting me, for understanding. We're survivors, Diane, both of us, and survivors look out for each other. 3 years have passed since I saw my dead husband buying frozen peas at Tesco. 3 years since my world collapsed and rebuilt itself into something I never could have imagined. And today, sitting on the porch of my cottage in the Peak District, watching the sun set over hills I've walked 1,000 times, I can honestly say I am at peace. Not the peace of forgetting. You don't forget something like this. But the peace of acceptance. The peace of knowing that I survived the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged stronger on the other side. My life looks nothing like it did before. The Victorian terrace in Nottingham is gone, sold to a young family who will fill it with new memories, untainted by lies. The photographs of Edward are packed away, not destroyed but no longer displayed. The woman who defined herself as a wife, a partner, half of a whole, she's gone too. In her place is someone I'm still getting to know. A woman who lives alone and likes it. A woman who tends a garden and takes long walks and reads books by the fire. A woman who has learned, finally, that she is enough on her own. Rebecca got married last spring. A small ceremony in a garden in Kent, with fairy lights in the trees and her sister as maid of honor. James, the doctor she'd started dating after the trial, is everything Edward never was, honest, reliable, present. Will you walk me down the aisle? She'd asked me a month before the wedding. Don't you want to do it alone, as a statement? She'd shaken her head. I want you there. You're the one who held our family together. You're the one who taught me what strength looks like. Who better to walk me toward my future? I cried for an hour after that conversation. Tears of joy for once. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Charlotte is doing well. She finished her degree, top of her class, and is now working as a graphic designer in Manchester. She has a flat she loves, friends who support her, and a therapist she still sees monthly. I'm happy, Mum, she told me during a recent visit. Not despite what happened, but I don't know, it changed me, made me stronger in some ways, more careful about who I trust. Is that a good thing? I think so. I don't give my heart away easily anymore. But when I do give it, it's fully, because I know what it costs to have it broken. My youngest daughter, forged in fire, emerging as steel. I couldn't be prouder. Thomas is 2.5 now. Diane sends photographs regularly, a chubby toddler with Edward's dark hair and Diane's bright smile. He started nursery. He loves dinosaurs and refuses to eat vegetables unless they're hidden in pasta sauce. Normal childhood things. Untouched by the chaos of his origins. He asked about his daddy for the first time last week, Diane told me during one of our coffee dates. I didn't know what to say. What did you tell him? That his daddy made some bad choices and had to go away for a while. That it wasn't Thomas's fault. That he's loved no matter what. That sounds perfect. It doesn't feel perfect. It feels like I'm lying. You're protecting him. There's a difference. When he's older, you can tell him more. But for now, he just needs to know he's loved. Diane nodded, wiping her eyes. You're good at this, knowing what to say. 27 years of marriage to a liar taught me the value of truth, even when it's hard. Edward is still in prison. He'll be released next year, early for good behavior, though I've made it clear I want no contact. Neither do the girls. Whatever remnants of family loyalty we once felt have been thoroughly destroyed. He writes sometimes. Letters that arrive at my old address and are forwarded by Rebecca, who reads them before deciding whether to send them on. They're always the same, she told me. Apologies, excuses, claims that he's changed. I've stopped reading them. What do you do with them? Burn them. Watching them turn to ash is actually quite therapeutic. I didn't argue. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. The strangest development has been my friendship with Diane. We meet monthly now, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for walks, sometimes just to sit in comfortable silence and process the absurdity of our shared history. Two women, bonded by the same man's betrayal, building something unexpected from the wreckage. People think it's strange, she admitted once. That we're friends, they don't understand how we can stand to be around each other. What do you tell them? That we're the only two people in the world who truly understand what we went through. That judgment doesn't help anyone. And that holding on to anger only poisons the person holding it. She paused. I learned that last part from you, actually. Did you? You could have hated me forever. You had every right, but instead you offered compassion. You saw me as a victim, not an enemy. That changed everything. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, standing on a doorstep, ready to expose and destroy. And the woman I'd become, sitting in a coffee shop, sharing scones with the mother of my ex-husband's child. Growth happens in unexpected ways. If you're listening to this story, I want you to know something. The dead don't always stay dead. Sometimes the people we've buried, emotionally, legally, literally, come walking back into our lives when we least expect it. Sometimes the grief we've processed turns out to be based on lies. And sometimes, the discovery that destroys everything becomes the foundation for something new. I lost a husband I thought I knew. But I found myself. I found daughters who are stronger than I ever imagined. I found friendships in the most unlikely places. And I found peace, not despite the pain, but because of what I learned from surviving it. So let me ask you something, friend. Have you ever discovered that someone you loved wasn't who you thought they were? Have you ever had to rebuild your entire understanding of your own life? Have you ever found unexpected allies in the people you thought were enemies? If so, I hope my story gives you courage. Courage to follow the truth, even when it leads to devastating places. Courage to reach out to other survivors, even when it feels impossible. Courage to rebuild, one day at a time, until the life you create is even better than the one that was taken from you. Because you deserve honesty. You deserve peace. You deserve a life that isn't built on someone else's lies. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have your own story of resurrection and rebuilding, of dead husbands who weren't dead, or truths discovered in grocery store aisles, I'd love to hear it. Leave a comment below. Tell me your truth. Because we heal when we share. And we rise when we know we're not alone. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, sometimes the person you thought you buried is still walking around, buying frozen peas. But that doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning.